Hey Naturals, Gabby Wallace here, and I am super excited to bring you a very special conversation with one of my favorite travel writers in English, Ralph Potts. Ralph wrote a book that's been very influential in my life called Vagabonding, and he's just published a new book called Souvenir. So join us as we talk about our philosophy on travel, language learning, and where you can really see the real America and much more. You're going to love our conversation. So, if you are an English learner and you would like to learn more English for your travels or your other English related goals in life, make sure that you come visit gonaturalenglish.com where you can learn more with the Go Natural English method. The link is in the description, gonaturalenglish.com. I'll see you there. Now, enjoy the conversation with travel author Ralph Potts. Hey, Ralph, it's so good to have you here to have a conversation with you. I'm a huge fan of your work, and reading your book, Vagabonding, years ago gave me the confidence to travel and explore the world independently. And I just want to bring you to have a conversation and talk a little bit about traveling and exploring and language learning and your new book as well. I'm super excited to hear what you have been working on recently and what you're excited about. So thank you so much for joining me here.
You bet. I always love to talk about travel. So
Awesome. Very good. So yeah, your book, Vagabonding, kind of opened the doors to travel, just changing my mindset. I think, a lot of people, as you know, have this idea that travel is for rich people or travel is for like when you retire, or it's not for me. It's not for the common person. And after reading your book, it really changed my mindset. I remember when I started traveling at that time, I ended up also teaching abroad in Japan. And I know you started out your international travels in that way as well, right?
I did, yeah. Sort of with the idea to fund travel. But then,
Yeah.
of course, as you know, living overseas, um, you learn so much socioculturally. You learn to sort of internalize what it's like to be in another culture, which is something you can't grasp intellectually.
Oh, yeah. You can read all you want about another culture, and you could like eat all the sushi you want, but you'll never know what it's like to be in Japan or South Korea until you're actually there, right?
Yeah, there and to an extent making mistakes, and that's almost a word of
Absolutely.
encouragement to English listeners you might have who are worried about that. That
Yeah.
it's through mistakes that you learn. You don't want to intentionally offend your host culture, but
Right.
yeah, there's some you like you said, you can read all you want about a place, but until you're there and sort of negotiating with the place, it's a completely different experience.
I absolutely love that you just said making mistakes can be a good thing, because that's what I always say to my language learners is that we need to make more mistakes. Don't be afraid of that. Maybe don't make the same mistake over and over and over, but
Yeah,
make it, learn from it, and that's really where you grow.
for sure. Yeah, and I think travel or being in other cultures forces you to depend on that language. A corollary for me is Spanish. I go to Latin American countries. My Spanish is not that great,
Hmm.
but I'm forced to communicate it enough that I can get my point across. That I speak
Yeah.
very poor Spanish, but I get there. And I think it's like, not that I'm that great at Spanish still, but it's through speaking poorly that you learn to keep improving. That you learn what works and what doesn't, and you begin to have a better ear
Yeah.
for how people speak. So, yeah, I can't say enough good things about being fearless enough to make those mistakes and
Yeah.
getting out there. And on the matter of fear, I think oftentimes there's a lot of fears, at least in the United States. I know that not all of your audience is based in the United States, but
Hmm.
there's a lot of fears attached to travel.
Yeah.
Dangers, expenses, but that I think that ties into this idea that travel is something that you buy this smooth edge travel experience, and then you approach it as a consumer. Whereas, as I say in Vagabonding, it's something you give to yourself. It's something you allow yourself to have. And if you can get past those initial expenses, if you can sidestep those fears and just realize that the fears are not as realistic as you might think they are, then you can be in the world and be growing and living an exciting life.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Let me ask you a little bit about the difference between traveling and vagabonding. I know you've probably explained this thousands of times, but for someone who may not be familiar with your work, I mean, what's the difference between the two?
Well, vagabonding is a subset of travel. Like philosophically, I think travel is something that can happen when you walk to the corner store, or talk to your neighbors. But vagabonding is long-term travel. It's about taking time away from your normal life to travel for an extended period of time. So it's not just taking vacation time or holiday time from work to travel. It's actually taking time off and sort of dedicating a portion of your life to traveling long-term in a slow and meaningful way. And I don't think that there's a hard and fast rule for how long that is. A lot of people will set a year aside. That's a great increment of time. But I think you can go vagabonding in 6 weeks. You can go vagabonding for 6 years. So it's long-term travel in whatever fits your interests and capabilities. And it's not really a contest. It doesn't matter how long you travel or how many countries you visit, but it's just about how engaged you are and how open you are to the world, and really just being in a different mindset than you are at home, allowing yourself to be a full-time traveler for a while.
I love that. And a lot of people assume that this is for gap year. Like when you graduate college, you take a year to travel the world and then you need to get to work. That's just what you do. But it's not just for 22-year-olds, right? I mean, obviously I'm not 22, you're not 22, and we still travel, right?
Yeah. And that's something that I have, since the book has come out, the culture has shifted a bit so that it's less weird for non-22-year-olds to travel. Sort of I did another interview recently about digital nomadism, which was a term that didn't exist when I first wrote Vagabonding. I think it's come since, like the social media world has grown to accommodate being able to work from overseas. So, obviously there's people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s who take career breaks, who take sabbaticals, but also people who just sort of make their work portable. They in the winter they go to Rio or Cape Town or Hawaii, and they work through their computer and they find ways to make it work. And a core philosophy of vagabonding is the idea that your time is your truest form of wealth. If you shift things in life and just don't prioritize material wealth and status, then you can find all kinds of time to travel and live a more interesting life than billionaires who are, burdened down by mansions and jet planes.
Totally. I think it really is about prioritizing. As far as, affording to travel, it's about prioritizing, putting some savings toward travel as opposed to whatever other things you could spend money on. So I know a lot of people would say, well, sure, you can afford to travel, but what about the rest of us? I mean, maybe they think that someone who travels is rich, but maybe we've just prioritized it. So do you have maybe some quick tips for people to afford travel? I know there's a lot of different ways, but maybe for someone who is just wondering, how can I afford that?
Well, one thing that isn't even financial is just decide that you're going to do it, right? You can keep relegating your travels to the future, but if you say, I'm going to do it and I want to, it depends on your situation, but even if you don't have a lot of money, you can say, in 2 years, I'm going to be on the road. Yeah. And then suddenly it becomes real. And then maybe if you tell some people who can keep you honest that way, and then suddenly you can find all this wealth in your day, I'm in New York right now for the next 6 weeks, and sometimes I go down to get a cup of coffee. By the time I tip the barista, it's like $4. Well, for $6, I can get a whole carton of coffee and drink them out of my I Heart Bingo mug. And then week by week, I've saved a lot of money. So I think that there's ways. My sister cuts my hair when I'm back home in Kansas for free, right? So I think your daily routine, you may end up finding ways to save $10 a day, but what happens by the end of the month? Well, you've saved a fair amount of money,
Yeah, absolutely.
And so really, I think that once once travel in your future becomes real, you start making decisions that prioritize that future experience. And you realize that you're often throwing money at situations at home that you don't need to. And then pretty soon, just by scaling back your routine, you have a lot more money to save.
Or there may be opportunities to go work abroad, like we mentioned, going to teach English abroad, or maybe teaching your native language, whatever it may be, or something completely different. There's a lot of jobs that you can do abroad, or volunteering and really cutting costs. You're in New York City, and I know you were just in Hawaii, and I know you've traveled a lot of the U.S. For a foreigner who wants to travel in the U.S. and see the real America, this is kind of a loaded question, but what would you tell them? Is New York the place to go? Because that's kind of where everyone thinks that they should go. Let's say someone from Brazil or someone from Japan, and they want to see America. I mean, what would you tell them?
Well, I'm not going to knock New York because it's a great world city. I literally, it's one of my favorite cities in the world, actually. Yeah. But really, people who come to the United States, they go to New York and maybe do a side trip to DC or Philadelphia or something. They often go to Florida. A lot of Europeans go to Florida for the sunshine. Yeah. People go do a West Coast trips where they'll do LA, Vegas, San Francisco. But you really sell yourself short if you're hopping from city to city, right? If you're only going to places that you've heard about already. I'm a huge fan in the United States. You have to do a road trip. It's worth whatever it costs to rent or buy a car and drive around. And America has these great interstate highways, but get off the interstate highways, drive on little roads, go to small towns. And I'm from Kansas, which it's funny. You're near Kansas right now. I think in places where this holds true everywhere, actually. If you go to places that other tourists don't go, local people just have more time for you and more interest in you. And so you go to the little cafe in a town of 500 people and you're Japanese or German or Australian, and suddenly you're the most interesting person in the city, right? Yeah. And so I think that's a way to get out of what I call in vagabonding the tourist matrix. And there's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of your experiences are kind of prepared for you if you're seeing the sights, air quote, the sights in countries. Whereas if you're just driving around and it's just like, here's a town on the map, I'm going to go to Boring, Oregon, because that's a funny sounding name. And you just go and see what's in Boring, Oregon, taking small highways. And it's just amazing how, using my home state as an example, Kansas is seen as a boring place because people take Interstate 70 to get to Colorado, and it gets very flat, and people get tired of driving in Kansas. So actually, there's some beautiful parts of Kansas if you get off I-70, or just interesting parts of Kansas that are rural and not places that you would ever see in a guidebook. Right. And it's one thing to go. There's some great museums in New York, like the Museum of Natural History, the Met. There's dozens of good museums. But if you go to the little county museum in a rural part of America, you can bet that curator is going to, talk your ear off, because the little curator in Minneapolis, Kansas, doesn't usually get travelers from Korea or China or Brazil or wherever. And they can take an interest in you in a way that the curator at a big metropolitan museum can't.
Totally.
Yeah. And so I could preach about this forever, but
no, I love that. I was just going to add, if you go to, let's say I'm Brazilian and I go to New York, it's very easy to find other Brazilians, and you kind of naturally gravitate toward people from your country. It happens to Americans, it happens to everyone. And so it's too easy to just fall in with that crowd and speak your native language and not really have an American experience, whatever that may be. So I'm a fan of telling people, go to Kansas. It's boring, and that's what you want. Like, that's exactly what you want to experience.
Yeah, there's an old Onion headline that says, "Semester abroad spent hanging out with other Americans in Barcelona," right?
And it's so true. It happens all the time.
And you might think of those as training wheels experience. And by training wheels, I mean when you're a child, you have training wheels on your bicycle, and then once you learn to ride the bicycle, you don't have to have the training wheels anymore. Right. And sure, start in New York, hang out with some Brazilians. Yeah. But then then you have to sort of jump into that vulnerability, into that fear zone where you're not going to fall back. There's no Portuguese to speak
Yeah.
outside of these big cities with immigrant populations. And so you just go and you start engaging with people, and Americans love a smile. It's funny that
We smile a lot. It's kind of
we
awkward
smile
for
a
other
lot.
people.
Yeah. And we recognize, even the air quotes weirdest foreigner, if they have a big smile and they're friendly and they're trying to speak, people will be charmed, and they'll help you out even if your English isn't perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. So that kind of leads me to another question I wanted to ask you about how to connect with local people, because I think, especially in the last few years, everyone is, looking down at their phone, and I feel like it's a little harder to talk to strangers because a lot of people on the train or in the coffee shop or, public places where you might meet people are looking at social media. And I love social media. There's a lot of benefits to using it also to connect to people. But I mean, how do you connect with people in real life these days?
That's a good question, and that's something else that has really shifted since I started traveling.
Yeah.
And I give some advice in vagabonding, like find a sports game, talk. And I'm talking to American travelers usually, so I say find some kids who are studying English and throw out some phrases at them. Just actually ask a dumb question. Oftentimes if you're an outsider, you have an advantage over a local person because you can just say, "Hey, I'm from Argentina and I'm hungry. And where's a good place to eat?" And people love to share that information. Not everybody. Some people, especially in big cities like New York, are going to be in a hurry.
Right.
But oftentimes you can sort of use your foreignness as a pretext to talk to people. And no, there's never a bad dumb question. Dumb questions are always good because I think most people like to help other people who are new to a place for the first time. Now, there are social media options for meeting people too. There's there's meetup groups, there's couch surfing, there's social apps. You can get on. I mean, there's dating apps. Sometimes those can maybe give the wrong impression if you're just going to randomly meet people. But there's equivalents of that. I mean, you can even get on your Facebook or Twitter feed and say, "Hey, does anybody have any friends in Boston?"
Right.
I would encourage everybody not to be too dependent on that. Because you can meet a lot of people just by reaching out through social media and using various apps. But just there's something about the "I'm hungry, where's a place to eat?" or "that looks like a fun soccer game. Do you need a goalkeeper?" Those simple person-to-person interactions are special.
Yeah. So don't be afraid to ask a silly question. I also found that nowadays, a lot of people go through social media to meet people in person. For example, I joined a rock climbing gym in Kansas City to make some new friends because I'm kind of new here. And there's a Facebook group associated with rock climbing in Kansas City. And people post there if they want climbing partners. But you could just walk up to someone in the gym and say, "Hey, do you want to be my climbing partner?" But people don't do that as much. It's like you're supposed to ask through the social media first and then meet in real life. So I feel like some social dynamics are changing. Not that you can't just walk up to people and ask, but I think it's worth a look. Search for if there's groups of interest or locations, that you can kind of link up with people first, and you'll hit the ground running.
Yeah, well, again, there's no dumb questions. The worst thing a person could say is no, or I already have one.
Right.
And even sometimes people are sort of attracted. I think people use the social media route because they think that's what the rules are.
Right.
And then once you have somebody with a big smile who's asking dumb questions and inviting people to be their climbing partner or whatever the equivalent of that is in a different situation,
right,
then they relax a little bit and they're open to it. And again, some people might not be interested in that, but some people will. And even if you don't get a climbing partner, then you'll sort of have somebody that you recognize and somebody who will look at you and think, "Oh, there's that friendly person who smiles a lot and asks me that dumb question. I'm going to go talk to them." So
totally.
It's just like building those social networks in real life, which is an practiced thing these days.
Well, and it's the most meaningful part of travel, I think. I mean, I love going to see museums and monuments and all that and taking pretty pictures. But what I really remember is the people that I get to talk to and the conversations. And I think you're missing a lot. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here, but you're missing a lot if you don't go out of your way and ask some silly questions and start some conversations, right?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And it's a good, like I'm an introvert by nature. And so travel forces me to talk to people. Sometimes just because I'm lost or bored or lonely, you know,
Totally.
but yeah, no, it gets me out of my shell and forces me to be social in a way that's really good for me, I think.
So you travel to non-English speaking places. How important is it to learn the language before you go?
As a courtesy, learning phrases of the language is useful.
Yeah.
You can literally go to places and know nothing of the language and do fine. Um,
Is that because people speak English generally or?
mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we're privileged as Americans, or those of us in the Anglosphere, having it as a first language is really useful because it's the world's second language right now. Um, and so, but you know, almost anywhere you go, there's so many people traveling with no phrases beyond hello and thank you that if you commit yourself to learning 50 words of Thai, you know,
Mhm.
or 10 phrases in Portuguese or whatever, then suddenly people are going to help you with English regardless. But if you sort of demonstrate that you can say, you know, where is the bathroom in a really horrible accent, then
Yeah.
you'll say it in this sort of adorably 5-year-old way. And, and it'll charm people. I mean, there's places like France, for example, where I teach a writing class every summer. And I always tell my students to learn the pleasantries because France is a more formal culture. There's this reputation that French people have for being rude, but it's actually the opposite. The Americans are the rude ones. They're too informal. They're not saying hello to the proprietors. They're not giving the proper greetings. And so you master those 10 to 20 phrases of French that can establish you as a polite, you know, you just say a really horrible bonjour, monsieur, and they will, one, know that you're trying to be polite, and two, know that you're horrible at French.
Yeah.
And they'll help you out, you know, that you basically established your goodwill. And so language works at several levels. And one is direct communication, but also is just an expression that you're not a privileged American who is just swaggering through on the fact that people should speak English, but that you're making an effort.
Yeah, I find that a lot of my English learners really want to have perfect English. They want to have excellent fluency before they ever travel outside their countries. And that's admirable. But then, like, you're waiting for this moment that never comes because, first of all, what is perfect fluency? I mean, native English speakers don't have perfect fluency. So I guess I'm just kind of making an observation that I try to encourage people to just take what you have and go with it. And you know, you'll learn as you go, right?
Yeah, for sure. And again, be fearless, be willing to make mistakes. And even you get a lot of interesting perspective on your own language as you make mistakes in another one, right? And I don't think anybody should wait until they get perfect.
Right.
And you know, I taught English, conversation English in Korea for a while. And one thing I learned is that you know, the ilyet in Korean, the letter is that contains L and R, and we just use our mouth differently.
Yeah.
When we say an L, our tongue goes up, and when we say an R, it sort of curls back. And
Right.
so just knowing, and I'm just using like if this is a Korean traveler, knowing that sometimes you're messing up your L's and your R's, but just sort of knowing that you're getting your tongue in shape. You know, you're doing your exercises.
I was
And
actually
then
thinking about that. You know, how did your students say your name? I mean, your name is like
right.
R's and L's, and you know, it must have been difficult anyway.
Yeah, in Korean, literally, if you use the Hangul letters, it's ROLF.
Interesting.
But that's a great example. You know, I could start the lesson with my name, and again, I don't think there's a need to be self-conscious. For example, if you're Korean, because that's just something your mouth is used to forming Korean words. But so what I'm saying, basically, whatever language you speak, you know, French people drop the H on all their words, whereas we pronounce the H. Just be aware as you're making mistakes, be aware that that's happening. And then you can sort of exercise your mouth muscles and sort of have an intelligent approach to your mistakes as you as you gloriously and enthusiastically make mistakes in another language.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, mistakes are the starting point of learning. So I want to ask you, what are you doing in New York and what's going on with your new book with Souvenir? Tell us a little bit about that, and when is it coming out exactly? And yeah, tell us.
Well, I'm in New York because New York is one of my favorite cities.
Okay.
I have a lot of colleagues and a lot of friends here. And so I try to spend as much time in New York as I can. I have a friend who's out of the country, so I'm staying in his apartment for a while. And it just gives me a chance to see old friends, to meet editors and colleagues, and just enjoy the metropolis for a while. Because in Kansas, where I'm often based, I think the closest town has like 300 people or something. So
Wow.
when you have 3 million people in a single borough, it's just nice to be in a dynamic city. And I do this a lot, I'll have a little sojourn in New York, or I'll spend a few months in the winter in Southern Africa or Argentina or something. Again, it's that sort of that digital nomad principle that I'm not spending that much more money than I would be spending in the United States, but I'm spending it in a unique place. So that explains my time in New York. I just have a nice opportunity to house sit for a friend, and I'm enjoying this wonderful city. As for the book, it comes out, I'm not sure when this interview will air, but it comes out the second week of March.
About the same time. Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah. Well, this is my book debut interview. So
Yes.
it's called Souvenir, and it's vagabonding is a very broad travel philosophy with a lot of advice, whereas Souvenir is literally about souvenirs. It's sort of a deep dive into this phenomenon, sort of the historical and psychological phenomenon of why we collect these things as we travel. And as I wrote the book, it was really interesting because I think there's something very connected to our core sense of self about collecting souvenirs, because we're traveling through countries where we can't stay very long. We don't belong to these countries. So we take a little piece, we take a little, either we pick up a rock or off the ground, or we save the bottle of soju that we drank at that wonderful party, or we go to a gift shop and we buy a little Eiffel Tower keychain or a t-shirt that says Rio de Janeiro. And these become parts of our lives, and they become little symbols of our memories and our ways of being in the world. And so by the time I was done writing the book, I realized that souvenirs end up, whether we intend to or not, becoming deeply meaningful symbols and metaphors for how we interact with the world, and how we collect them changes over time. And so it's really interesting. So again, it's not like a sequel to Vagabonding. It's not a direct book of travel advice, but it's a deep meditation. And I think one that is a lot of fun and worth considering, how some of the most interesting stories we tell about our lives, we don't tell with our mouths, but with the objects that we surround ourselves when we come home. So I have a launch party here on March 26th at Cornelius
New York City?
in New York. Yeah. And don't have a big book tour planned, but I'm really proud of the book and happy to have it out in the world.
That's exciting. And do you personally buy a lot of souvenirs?
Well, that's something I had to consider when I was writing the book, because
Right.
it felt like I didn't. And there's a lot of, different iterations of souvenirs, because there's like heirlooms and mementos and keepsakes and other things that are like souvenirs without quite being souvenirs. Like I have Mardi Gras beads from 2005, which was like the last Mardi Gras before Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah.
And I didn't really think of it as a souvenir, but now it's this little symbol of this interesting time in my life. And I have my grandfather's Zippo lighter, and I never knew him. He died long before I was born. And so it's this little symbol of my family history. And that's mixed in with like these masks. I write about this in the book, that these masks that I bought as I was traveling through Asia. And the more I bought the masks, the more I realized that I wasn't really sure why I was buying the masks. And so I talk about that in the book, about how our tastes in souvenirs change. And I think, and this is actually borne out by researchers, is that new travelers buy more souvenirs than experienced travelers. whereas experienced travelers are more likely statistically to take those piece of the rock souvenirs, to pick up, to keep a ticket stub, or take a seashell, or to keep that T-shirt they wore when they were, in the samba parade or whatever. And so I have this mix. I have in my house gift shop souvenirs. I have little soaps from hotels that were part of a meaningful trip. I have my Kansas City Royals baseball souvenirs that are more like keepsakes. But again, they all tell this story.
Yeah. The sentimental stuff. It's
absolutely, yeah,
not necessarily expensive. The things you just listed are pretty much free, but it has some sentiments. But I'm just imagining your house is covered in souvenirs and sentimental items. And do you feel like when you go home, you have your home as kind of a place where you rest and you can just, do laundry and repack. But like, is it also where you kind of collect all these things as a memory of your travels?
Yeah. And I don't want to overemphasize like souvenirs themselves, because my souvenirs are mixed in with books and furniture and like I said, keepsakes and kitchen utensils and stuff. And so it's not like you walk into my house and you see 500 souvenirs dominating every part of the landscape. But I mean, you use souvenirs to remember your travels in the same way you use keepsakes to remember family members or friends or something. And so absolutely. Actually, I have a big bookcase. My office is just a whole wall is books, because when I got my house in Kansas after years of travel, I wanted to have a wall of books. And so those are interesting. I have an interesting relationship with them because some of them I read and some of them I haven't. And now I have too many books. They don't even fit on the shelf anymore. And so it's like these objects are sort of in conversation with each other. And it's sort of this shorthand that only I can understand. Like a guest can come in and say, oh, this is an interesting mask. Where is it from? Or why is there a boat propeller hanging on your wall? Or what's this picture, right? And so I intuitively know all these things. Oh, that boat propeller is when I went down the Mekong in Laos. And this mask is a dance mask from Korea, and I got it at the market, at this specific market. And so it's interesting. I think one take home, if you read my book, is that suddenly you'll realize how, without even realizing it, most of us surround ourselves with these objects that remind us of the meaning of life. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people, like I didn't really consider myself a big souvenir collector before I wrote the book. But as I wrote the book, I realized that in a very subtle way, I have always used souvenirs and objects to sort of ground myself in a kind of sense of self. So it was a fun book to write.
Yeah, I can't wait to read it. I am super excited for that book to come out, and it sounds like there's a lot of deepness in there. I'm excited.
March 8th.
March 8th. Super. Yeah. Awesome. Well, where can people find it? In bookstores, on Amazon, or on your website, or? They
can find it on my website, which is rolfpotts.com. Or just, Rolf Potts Souvenir. You can go to Amazon or other online retailers. Big bookstores will probably have it. It's part of the Object Lesson series. Not all bookstores carry the Object Lesson series. You can order it through any bookstore. But probably the most dependable, not to shill Amazon too much, but I live in the middle of nowhere and there's no bookstores, so I end up getting a lot of books from Amazon. And so that's a dependable way to get the book. It's just to order it online.
Perfect. And if people want to find out more about you, where should they go?
They can start at rolfpotts.com. That's a collection. They can read a ton of my travel writing for free before they ever decide if they want to buy Vagabonding or Marco Polo Didn't Go There, or one of my other books.
Yeah.
And also links to my social media, at Rolf Potts at Instagram, at Rolf Potts at Twitter. I'm not really super prolific on either. There's a lot of Hawaii pictures up on Instagram right now.
Yeah.
And then there's a contact form there, and I always try my best to answer emails, for people who send me earnest inquiries and greetings. So that's the starting point, rolfpotts.com.
Perfect. Well, I'm so glad you responded to my message and that we could have this conversation. Thank you so much, Rolf.
You bet. Happy travels.